Hey, 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 everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show. My home station is AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Of course, you see who's on the screen, Dr. Cornel West. You all have been calling me all day. Where is he? When is he going to be here? He's here right now on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota, and on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. Please, everybody, like and share, like and subscribe there, but share the show. And go to the Santita Jackson Facebook page, Santita Jackson and Friends. That's the only place where I can accept a friendship. So please go there. And Twitter, well, X, at Santita J, at Santita J. I'm so excited to have this man. I mean, he's someone of unsurpassed brilliance. He really intellectually has no peer, but more than that, I think his morality surpasses even that. And that is what is so exciting. There's not a person in the Jackson family to whom he is not beloved. We have so much respect and admiration for you. Indeed, when I was talking to my mother about interviewing you today, she said, remember this, I don't call him Cornell. I've always called him Dr. West. Not that he's ever asked me to, but I just have so much respect for him. And I just love calling him Dr. West. But she calls him Cornell. And sometimes she calls him Dr. West. But she said, tell Cornell that he must continue to run because he is upholding our historical position. And at this time in history, the historical record must reflect where we stood on Gaza, where we stood on empire, where we stood on racism, materialism, all forms of classism and war, all of these things. Someone has to do that. And this is your moment. And so, everybody, I want you to please like and share this show. Several people asked me when I told them that I was going to interview you, Dr. West. And of course, Jimmy, Princeton, Harvard, just everything. And I don't know how you stayed in the Ivy League because you drive them crazy, but you do. You managed to stay. That having been said, I mean, his mind is unequaled. But that having been said, he is running for president. And this is something that you don't have to do at this point in your life. And I want to know, let's clarify, are you still running? If you're still running, why?
Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. I just want to first say that it is an indescribable joy to once again be in such rich dialogue with my dear sister, so much brilliance, so much elegance, style, heart, soul, and connected to that Jackson family of nobility. When you talk about your mother, I just want to pause. You know what I mean? That's true. I just want to pause. That's silence. But the same is true with Brother Jesse himself, because you all been through hell and high water and you emerged with so much magnificent determination and a willingness to keep loving and serving the people. And I just love what your precious mother said, because I think all of us in the end want to be true to what was poured into us by mama and daddy, and for me, Shiloh Baptist Church, and Martin King and Fannie Lou Hamer, and this sister Harriet Tubman, and so many others, trying to hold our historic position on moral and spiritual grounds about the plight and predicament of people catching hell, whose backs are against the wall, to use the language of the great Howard Thurman. And that's very much what our calling is. That's what you do on your radio show. I'm going to hold on to the truth telling, hold on to the justice seeking, hold on to the joy sharing and joy spreading, and do it with a smile and style. That's the best of Black folk. And I think in so many ways, if we can be true to our calling and vocation, we would have done all that we can do in the short time allotted to us in space and time. And that's very much what this campaign is about. I'm running for justice, but as a Christian, I'm running for Jesus, and I'm unapologetic about that. And what does that mean? That means, in fact, that I'm going to tell some truths about mass incarceration and poverty and wealth inequality and materialism and imperial policies abroad and genocide and Gaza. I'm not going to be a genocide denier or a genocide enabler. I'm going to be a condemner of genocide, but it's going to connect to Congo. It's going to connect to Sudan. It's going to connect to military occupation in Haiti. It's going to connect to the south side of Chicago. It's going to connect to the east side of LA. It's a moral, spiritual witness. Now, of course, for me, it's a Christian witness, but we Christians have no monopoly on that. Malcolm had it as a Muslim. Bell Hooks had it as a Buddhist. James Baldwin had it as an agnostic, even though he's a product of the church. But there's a whole number of ways in which we can bear witness. We just be true to what has been put into us. And yes, I'm planning to stay in this race. I'm heading toward the end, and I'm running because I want to hold up a bloodstained banner of truth and justice at a time of overwhelming dimness and grimness, and at a time where it has become so normal and natural to sell out, to sell your soul for a mess of pottage, just for position, status, spectacle, rather than moral content of service and spiritual substance of putting a limelight on the plight of those who are in highly vulnerable positions.
We're talking with Dr. Cornel West, a brilliant intellectual preacher man, and he is also running for president. How do you, with this powerful, I would say, godly conviction, how do you run for president on that? I mean, how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean,
As a Christian, I mean, as someone who feeds the multitudes. I mean, I can't imagine Jesus denying someone food, clothing,
that's
shelter,
right.
education, access to becoming the actualization of God's plan for you in your
Yeah.
life. My pastor said, I've never seen God have a vision without making provision, but we
Mm,
continue to shut the doors. How do you run for president with that conviction, unashamedly, who you are convicted in the teachings of Jesus the Christ?
yes, yes, yes. I think it goes back again to your precious mother, Sister Jackie's talk about the historic position. You see, what is the historic position of a hated, terrorized, traumatized people for 400 years, but teach the world so much about love and freedom and joy? How do you hold up that historic position? Well, you hold it up through witness, you hold it up through praxis. And in trying to hold on to a witness that's over against hatred, terror, and trauma, to hold on to a praxis that tells Black people that there's no way out. And we say, we understand because you're looking at it through a narrow set of lens, but we come from a people who know that there's a way out of no way. Doesn't make any sense at all, but it still allows us to get through. We come from a people who look at both sides of the bloody Red Seas and see Pharaoh and still find a way through anyhow, despite the evidence. And the only way you do that is through example. That's the only way you can do it. That's what it is, the muster the courage to hope, muster the courage to love, and muster the courage to think critically for yourself, which is to find your voice, which is the anthem of Black people. Lift every voice, not lift every echo. We find our voices, but we find it with the love, and we find it with a freedom in love that provides a possibility, a hope. And that hope ain't got nothing to do with the optimism of America, and ain't got nothing to do with the optimism of the world. That's why when I heard my dear sister Harris talking about the greatest story ever told is the American story, I said, no, don't say that, my dear sister. That's idolatry. Don't say that. No, that's not the greatest story. Not at all.
What do
Our
you think
greatest
she meant
story is
when?
how you make how you make a breakthrough. You step
Mhm.
out on nothing and land on something. You see,
Mm.
that's the Palestinian Jew named Jesus. That's the story. The greatest privilege is to be an American. No, the greatest privilege is to love and be loved. That happens in Ethiopia, that happens in Australia, that happens in Guatemala, that happens in Brazil, or that can happen in Chicago. don't get that flag at the center and miss out on the cross. Every flag is under the cross. Every nation state is under God. Every government is under divine judgment. And once we miss that story, then we lose our historic position that your precious mother was talking about. How do we be true to what Martin and Fannie Lou were talking about? That's the standard. And that's been the standard of all of our of our great figures. We just lost Frankie Beverly, discovered by
Mhm.
Marvin Gaye out of Philadelphia. Went on to connect with Mays. Frankie, how you gonna be true to Marvin Luther? How you gonna be true to Nat King Cole? How you gonna be true to Johnny Hartman? And we ain't even got to the female side with Aretha and Chaka and the others. Sarah Vaughan, how you gonna be true to that great tradition? You come in with humility. Because when you look around and see all of those giants and geniuses, my God, Benjamin Elijah Mays and
Mm.
Mary McLeod Bethune, humility is the proper disposition. But then you have a tenacity because once you understand the standards that they set, you got a whole lot of work to do, my dear sister. You understand this better than the others. As a journalist yourself, as Ida B. Wells, my God, T. Thomas Fortune, right there, setting the standards. How do you keep the show going? How do you keep the truth flowing? How do you keep the justice visible? And then do it with all that style that you got. Well, that I started with.
You know what it is. I'm gonna tell you. I think, and I'm you touched me so. And I just remember coming to Princeton to see you many years ago when I lived in New York, and those wonderful words of wisdom that you gave me about so many things, about
Mm,
you know having a particular looking one way, but when you walk in the room, your politics are another way, and it throws everybody off, right? But I
mhm.
also think about when we were in Atlanta in 1988, when my father was wrapping up his final campaign.
Yeah.
So many people had come to him telling him he could be president. If you would do this, we can make this happen. And my mother said, okay. So what does that mean? He said, it means it's time for us to go. We have made our point.
Mm,
We have spoken for the poor, the Palestinian justice, Israeli security.
that's right.
We've spoken for, he just went through the whole list. He said, we've done everything that we promised Martin that we would do, that we promised God we would do. He said, now we will go home. Because, Jackie, we don't know what the other side of this would cost us
Mm,
and would cost our people. And I see you in that tradition. And so we are faced, Dr. West, today with huge questions, things that he took real hits on. Gaza, the Palestinians, the West Bank, 40 plus years ago. We're right here. Poverty, looming larger than ever before. I want to go through some of these issues and ask you where you see us being today and where a West administration would have us go. Let's start
mm.
with Gaza. The Lancet study has said 5 or 6 weeks ago that 186,000 people have been killed already, that we're on pace to kill 500,000 people at least. That's a fourth to a fifth of their population. In the meantime, they've developed plans to turn that into a beachfront community because it's also one of the wealthiest areas on earth. And we're at the center of it because we're sponsoring it.
Exactly.
How do you see this? Because both of the major candidates, whatever their internal feelings are, their public policies say we support Israel, and we do,
Right.
but we don't support you doing wrong. We support the principle of Israel, right? The idea and the ideal of it. But what do you see is the issue with that crisis, and how do you see us getting out of it?
Ooh, wonderful, wonderful question, my dear sister. I would just add one quick thing though about Brother Jesse, your beloved father, and that is that his impact on the Democratic Party was so profound that he was able to fundamentally transform it with proportionality, representation, with the shift from the smoking rooms where decisions were made to it being more transparency. And so, you know, and I know, and Brother Sharpton and others make this point that right, that there's no possibility of black folk gaining access to the highest position, be it Obama, be it Sister Harris, anybody else, without those changes within the party. Whereas myself, because I'm outside of the party, that it's a very different kind of dynamic in that way. So he's had much more fundamental impact on the Democratic Party in and of itself. It's really a Jackson-like party. The only problem is that they opted for the form and missed out on the content.
Mhm.
See, the content of the Jackson program was the King legacy that had to do with poverty, militarism, materialism. It had to do with racism and any kind of ideology that loses sight of the people. It could be Jews, it could be Muslims, it could be Arabs, whatever. So they missed out on the content. And so much of what I'm doing is part of just the legacy of Martin, trying to keep it alive, but it can no longer be kept alive within the Democratic Party. It's so dominated with corporate interests and so dominated with imperial policies like denying the genocide and like enabling the genocide. So the first thing I would want to say is, what kind of moral compass do we bring to this? If, let's say, 16,000 precious children were white or European or Israeli, and the genocide was being perpetrated by Arabs or Africans or black people, what would be the position of the U.S. government? Everybody knows what the answer to that would be. It would be exactly the opposite.
Mhm.
The U.S. government would be in solidarity with those undergoing genocide and would do everything to fight it. And I said, well, dang, I come out of Shallow Baptist Church. Jesus loved the little children, all the children of the world, red or yellow, black or white. They are precious in his sight. I'm going to be in solidarity with my Jewish brothers and sisters if they're undergoing genocide. I'm going to be in solidarity with my Palestinian brothers and sisters if they're undergoing genocide. If there's white brothers and sisters undergoing genocide and black people are perpetrating it, I'm in solidarity with the white brothers and sisters. It's a moral, spiritual issue. That's part of the greatness of the historic position that Sister Jackie's talking about. And that's what we have to follow through on. And that's why Jesse was one of the first to reach out to the Palestinians, because it had a moral and a spiritual dimension to it. You don't treat people this way, apartheid like, ethnic cleansing, and so forth. And that's true for Jews in Germany. That's true for Armenians and under Ottoman Empire. That's true for Sudan right now. We can go on and on and on. And so the first thing you need to do is to tell the truth. That's the first thing. You just need to tell the truth and then say, what does justice demand? It demands raising our voices, hitting the streets, going to jail, putting pressure to stop the killing, to stop the funding of the war, stop the funding of the apartheid like conditions, stop the funding of the ethnic cleansing, and make sure that people recognize, and you know, you and I say this all the time, no matter how much we get in trouble, a precious Palestinian baby has the same value as a precious Israeli baby, and a precious Israeli baby has the same value as a precious Palestinian baby. And that's true for black babies, white babies, indigenous babies, across the board. We are universalists. We are internationalists. That's what the cross means to us. Unarmed truth, unconditional love. That's what that cross really means. We know the Klan got a different understanding of that cross, but the cross, what the cross means to us is unarmed truth and unconditional love for everybody, starting on the town where mama and daddy come out. That's why we start with chocolate folk. We start with our love with chocolate folk, and it spills over to everybody. That's the greatness of art. That's John Coltrane blowing Love Supreme. That's Toni Morrison's Beloved. That's Stevie Wonder's Love and Need. We can go on, and us OJ's Love Train. It's not just songs. And we ain't got the Dorothy Love Coach yet.
Mm.
Ooh, or Mahalia. You see what I mean? Oh, what a great black people at our best. With the courage, the love, the hope. And we're not talking about the black sellouts, the black thugs, the black cowards, the black conformists. Every community has a variety of different folk, and it's inside of us. I got a whole lot of gangster thug in me. I work it out every day. Me and the Holy Ghost working it through every day to raise up and say, I'm going to be on Sister Santita's show today. Lord, give me strength. Try to be true to the best of who I am. Because I know all of us are wrestling with how do we somehow try to make it through all this grimness in this dimness, given the sickness. Oh my God, that debate I saw the other day. Ooh, Lord have mercy. Shit, Brother Trump was a black brother. He'd been in prison for years. He's beneath mediocrity. It's unbelievable. He'd be lucky to be head of a used car dealer if his name was Jamal. I mean, let's just be honest about it. He said, oh Lord, then Sister Harris comes and she's got to let everybody know that she believes in the lethal military might and the flag and so forth. Well, what about the mass incarceration? What about 40% of black children, brown children living in poverty? Let's hear about it. What about the unhoused and the homeless? What about workers who need more than just a $725 a minimum wage? They need a living wage of at least 15, 20. My candidacy calls for 25, but it's like, good God Almighty. Let's be honest about this thing. But she's locked in. She's locked in because the party itself is just so overwhelmed by big business and donors and benefactors of big money tied to militarism that would make Brother Martin turn over in his grave. You know what I mean?
Oh, well, I mean, but I'm scrolling through the comments. People are saying, tell the truth. I mean, it seems to me that's what the zeitgeist is commanding us to do today.
Mm-hmm.
People don't want the standard. I understand, as Bernie Sanders, Senator Sanders said, who did come out of the Jackson campaign, bless his heart. There were only two elected white officials in the United States who endorsed Reverend in 1983. He was one of the two. He was punched in the mouth by one of his Jewish sisters. She said he was a traitor. He said, no, I'm upholding our tradition and I'm going to stay right here.
That's right.
He said that people have gotten on him. And I'll give you this. They honored Reverend at the convention. They were not going to let any of our family members wheel him out, because he's in a wheelchair now because of the Parkinson's.
Right.
And so my brother used to have pushed back. He said, no, one of us, you've got a brother in Congress. Let him wheel him out. He said, no, we want Sharpton to do it. He said, we love Sharpton. He can come out, but his family needs to, we take care of him.
That's right.
So from there, he said, well, okay, how about Bernie Sanders? That's my friend. And he's Senator Sanders. They said no, because he's not on message. Now, he's gotten pushback because they said he's not given as fulsome of an endorsement as he should to Kamala Harris. He said, I don't know enough about her. And as the campaign has gone on, and has only been a few weeks old, he said, I understand. Do you think she's still a progressive? He said she's pragmatic. So she's trying to win. I get it. And yet I had the head of the Progressive Democrats of America, who said, we support her. That having been said, we also will be out in the streets the day after she's elected. Not to diminish her, but to advocate for our position. How do you do that? I mean, how do you deal with this Palestinian issue, which has bedeviled us for so long?
Yeah.
But now I think we're at a tipping point. Where do you think we are with this issue, Dr. West?
Well, I think it's a fascinating example you use of Brother Bernie, because as you know, I was with him for 2 campaigns. I have love for the brother, and I hadn't seen him since I mean, first time I saw him in a long time was when we were there at the Rainbow Coalition
Yeah,
gathering for Brother Jesse,
that's right.
just the night before the convention began.
Mhm.
And
And it was wonderful to be honest with you, to see you and Bernie Sanders standing with Reverend. Um, it was such a moving moment for all of us because there was so much consistency there. There was just so much power there,
mm,
in these voices that you all say what some people would consider to be impolitic, but it's truth. Eventually, people come around to it.
well,
So, I mean, so how do we handle this moment? Because the Palestinians were blocked from getting on the stage at the DNC,
yeah, I know
the
that
main
was
stage.
a shame. You can have ex-Trump folk, you can have Republicans, you can have sheriffs who support Cop City in Atlanta and other places, and can't have precious Palestinians. And their people are undergoing murder and mayhem and genocide. But I think in the case of Brother Bernie, it's fascinating because there's a sense in which he did not meet the moral litmus test when it came to Gaza.
Hmm.
You see, he meets that test when it comes to Wall Street greed. He meets that test when it comes to
Hmm.
supporting trade unions and so forth. But he didn't meet that test. Now, lately, he's tried to bounce back. He's got a very devastating critique of Netanyahu. But in terms of the genocide itself, and he still, for the most part, won't use the word, that he couldn't meet that test. And I think he disappointed a lot of people in that regard. And he's got to be true to himself. If he doesn't think it's a genocide, then put out his argument. It's a plausible argument, maybe, but it's not persuasive to me. But I think the
Hmm.
world can recognize genocide when they see it. But he just doesn't want to use that term. He wouldn't use a ceasefire for many, 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 many months.
Hmm.
You see, and you say, well, no, it's late. You're getting late. You're getting real late on this thing. People are dying. Precious people are dying now, brother. So he lost a lot of moral authority.
Hmm.
And that's always a difficult thing in public life. Most politicians these days, and so much politics legalize bribery and normalize corruption and politicize larceny anyway, that they don't care about moral authority. It's like, oh, integrity, moral authority, that's an afterthought. I'm trying to make the next deal. I'm trying to make the next move. I'm prudential. I'm pragmatic. Pragmatic? No, don't do in John Dewey and William James and John Charles Sanders Peirce, who founded pragmatism. They were pragmatism has always been tied to vision. You're talking about opportunism. Pragmatism is not the same thing as opportunism.
Hmm.
Pragmatism says you have ideals and you use practical wisdom to pursue those ideals, but you hold on to them. Opportunism says grab the next opportunity with no ideals at all. Everybody knows you can be manipulated. Everybody knows you can be bought. You can be sold. You can be incorporated. You can be co-opted. And it's very interesting. Even my dialogues with the Harris campaign, and a number of them have been kind enough to reach out and, oh, Brother West, we know that your campaign is broke, and we got resources, or we know that you got your challenge, and we got a position that we think is something you be interested in. Hey, you're talking to the wrong black man. I'm a Jesus loving free black man. I'm concerned about mass incarceration, poverty, genocide, and so forth. I'm keeping my eyes where it belongs. I'm not talking about, I don't need no job in Washington. I don't need well, I might need it, but I ain't interested in any kind of resources for me to no longer raise my voice, to withdraw my campaign. Is to withdraw your campaign, suspend your campaign, jump on the Harris bandwagon. No, you got the wrong black man for that. Good God Almighty.
Yes.
Now I recognize, and this is as you can imagine, this is a real challenge because people raise the question, well, what if it's one last battleground state left, and the only real possibility is a choice between Trump, who's a gangster and all outright fascist, and Harris, who's tied to her own kind of authoritarian policies when it comes to students, when it comes to Gaza. Well, Gaza is tied to pro-genocide and so forth. But certainly when it comes to reproductive freedom, she's much better. Certainly becomes a certain kind of issue, she is much better. What would you do then? Now, see, that's a tough question.
Hmm.
That is a tough question. And I would not want to be dogmatic on that question. I'm going to run till the end. I will never suspend my campaign. I will never withdraw in that sense. But if it came down to the last vote, well, then I'd have to pray on that and say, oh, okay, if you're going to choose between voting for me versus voting anti-Trump vote, sure, I could be open to something like that. Oh, absolutely. I recognize reproductive freedom is very important. I realize that there are certain things that that Harris has that Trump doesn't, because Trump is just, I mean, he's not just a fascist, but he looks like he's kind of quasi demented in a certain sense. He's just completely out of it with access to the buttons and things. But it's also true that Harris has a militarism that I could not abide with. But she also has a commitment to women's rights and commitment to my gay brothers and lesbian sisters and trans folks' rights that I am deeply committed to as well. So you can imagine at the very end, if it, I'm not going to put my particular project as the only thing standing, if that's the case. But I don't think that's the case. I think most of the people, the vast majority of people voting for me would never vote for Harris and would never vote for Trump. And therefore, I'm tied to what your mother says, which is going all the way, bear witness to this great tradition and our historic position, and then follow through after the election with the same witness.
What do, because we see the reports that the Harris campaign has reached out to various people who are running because they're trying to consolidate
Right, right.
people on the left. Uh, and I've not seen that happen before. And for that, I'm grateful. I appreciate that. I don't, but I still need your, as Mrs. Jackson said, as my mother said, uh, we got to have his voice.
Yes.
And it
Hello.
has to be unfettered, and
That's
the only way
very,
you could
very
get.
true, my dear sister.
So tell me, what did they, when they came to you, and share as much as you can, and withhold whatever you need to
Right,
withhold.
right,
When they
right.
called you, what did they want?
They just said that you are a major impediment for uh, Trump going to the White House. You could be the cause of American fascism, and that we hope that you would be willing to pull out of the campaign and become part of what Harris is doing and so forth. And I said, no, no, not me. I just was very honest about it. But I tell you this, and this is on your show, and I don't only do this on your show. But I got a call from Brother Martin III and Susanna Heschel, because in my speeches, as you know, I always talk about,
Rabbi Heschel's daughter.
absolutely, I talk
That's
about
right.
Martin Luther King Jr. and
That's
talk
right.
about the great Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. And I have a deep love for Martin III. I have a
Absolutely.
deep love for Susanna Heschel. And
That's
we had a
right.
magnificent talk. And they were saying, we appreciate you keeping our fathers visible. We appreciate that you always inject that moral and spiritual dimension. But we are convinced that if they were alive, they might have some questions as to how your presidential campaign could, in fact, be facilitating a Trump. And I told them, I said, I'm Socratic about these things. I'm open to insights. I'm open to arguments and everything else, you see. I said, but I just don't find your argument persuasive. It's plausible, but not persuasive.
Mm.
See, yes, I don't want wholesale fascism with Trump, but I see, in fact, the similar forces behind the Democratic Party when it comes to war, when it comes to Wall Street, when it comes to Silicon Valley. But they said, but what about reproductive freedoms and rights? I said, now, okay, you got a point there, and that's real. That's very, very real. There's no doubt about that. So I then have to acknowledge the ways in which my critique is a critique of the rot of the system, the corruption of the system, and the empire, therefore, decaying and declining. That doesn't mean the two parties are identical in every way, but they're still tied to mechanisms of repression, and they're still tied to denying genocide. Both parties still tied to enabling genocide. So we had a wonderful conversation. And I still love Sister Susanna, and I still love Brother Martin. We just came down in different places, and they just said, Well, okay, we acknowledge that you disagree with this, and I said, sure, I appreciate that. So in one sense, it was a compliment because they spoke honestly in terms of what I've tried to do both now in my life, and they spoke critically in terms of this particular moment and their support of the Harris campaign and my refusal to withdraw and jump on the Harris bandwagon. And there's been a number of folks, oh, it'd just be historic for you to jump on the Harris bandwagon. I say, historic? What do y'all understand historic to be? Not to be tied to a certain kind of witness when it comes to truth and justice, not to hold up the historic position that Jackie Jackson and others have talked about. They said, well, that you have no practical thinking. I said, no, I do have practical thinking, and I do understand that I never, in any way, want to be the sole impediment. I think that it's just not true that most of the folk who would vote for me, if I were not running, would vote for her. They would just stay home because they've already been thoroughly disenchanted with the corruption of the corporate duopoly, with the two-party system. But it's a situation now. There's no doubt about it. It's a situation.
Well, when people say that a vote for you, Ashley King is saying a vote for anybody but Harris Waltz, 24, is a vote for Trump. What do you say when people come to you? Because Chappell's response is this. She said, because Illinois is not a battleground state, you got her vote. She said they bring out the heavy hitters to pressure you, Dr. West. I was done, bless her heart, with the King children when they sold their birthrights for some money. Well, let me just say this in explanation of the Kings and in defense of them. When Dr. King was killed, he did not have $100 in his bank account.
Yeah.
Not $100. Mrs. King, with 4 children, Bernice had just turned 5. So she was 4 years of age in like 11 months. A daughter who was 12, and everything in between. Mrs. King had to get out in these streets and go to work.
Mm-hmm.
And her husband, she had to hit the speaker circuit. Mind you, this is as her husband had been the most hated man in America.
Exactly.
Okay. So I don't want us to be too harsh.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
the Kings have walked a road that we cannot even imagine.
That's
And
true.
and they had no protection. That having been said, and I hear you, Chappelle. And they also saw people coming in and profiting off of their father's intellectual properties.
That's right.
Remember, it was Oprah who moved Mrs. King into a beautiful condominium. She was in the same house she had been in with Dr. King. And Oprah Winfrey said, I really want you to be in a place that's a little safer, although she was safe in her neighborhood because the people protected her. But remember, they beat up Rosa Parks in her home
Oh, isn't that
and,
the
and
truth? In
stole it.
Detroit. In
Come on,
Detroit.
in Detroit,
Yes.
after having them run out of Alabama. So y'all, it's a little bit more complex. And I love Chappelle. I hear you. I'm just saying that it's not as simple as that because they were literally looking at poverty,
That's right.
as Dr. King had taken a vow of that. So just remember that. So
That's
they've
right.
been and they've also been trying to protect. That having been said, we're in 2024.
But that's well said, though, Sister Santita. I'm glad you said that. I'm glad
Well,
you said that
well,
because when you get somebody like Martin King, who is so committed to truth, justice, and
yeah.
love that even as a family man, when he gave every penny of the Nobel Prize to the cause, and I said to myself, brother, you come to my barber shop and we're gonna say you better save some of that money for your family now because you got some priorities here, my brother. And he say, I'm not that kind of brother. We got a lot of different kind of brothers in the barber shop.
Mhm.
I'm the kind of brother I got to take care of my family and then also be deeply committed to live and die for the people. But it's different. People make different kind of choices. Then when they have children, they also make different kind of choices. They're free to decide what they want to decide.
Yeah, my father did that. Push was built. Breadbasket was built on his speaking engagements.
Lord, Lord.
My mother, when she drove me to my high school, which at that time was the most competitive public high school in the state, it had just opened, really, maybe 2 or 3 years before. She said it would help us out a lot if you graduate at the top of your class. If the
Mm.
bottom drops out, which was coded language in our family for if one of these assassination threats takes hold,
Oh, Lord have mercy.
she said, I need you to finish at the top of your class because I might have to pay for the boys to go to school. I shouldn't have to pay for you. Please take that off of us. I said, I got you. Now, when they shot and killed Vernon Jordan, that man had been outside of my father's office for a week tracking him. My father wasn't at the office, but he went to different places around the office trying to figure out how he could get the kill shot. And he was so frustrated that he got in his car. He heard that Vernon Jordan was going to be in Indianapolis, and that's when he drove there and shot him and nearly
Mm.
killed him. And as we
Mm.
remember, when he was in the hospital, he had a fist-sized hole in his back, and they were going to let him die. Someone had the presence of mind to call a black surgeon who was one of the top surgeons in the world,
That's right.
got him out of bed, and they saved his life.
That's right.
Yeah, no, Paula, Mrs. King had it hard.
That's right.
And, but I hear you, Chaparral. You said you did know that. But it still made you cringe when they sold some of his personal items. And it's they've been put in a very tough position. Remember, 55% of Black Americans disapproved of Dr. King. Dr. King was going to fast until the point of death.
Yes,
He was
exactly.
also subject to manic depression.
That's
So
right.
his staff would not leave him alone in the last year of his life because he was so threatened by the FBI, and the FBI did kill him. They did. And they let it known that they were going to kill him. So when he would hear pops, he would jump. He was
That's
an incessant smoker. When they performed the autopsy on him, Dr. West, at 39, he had the heart of someone who was older than 70.
that's exactly right.
So it is in that tradition. I see you doing what some people are criticizing you for because many people are saying we got an opportunity to get the first Black woman in. And what I hear you saying, and help me, because we got a Black woman running, but we got DEI that's under attack. We've lost affirmative action at the at the college level, y'all. Black people, it's going to take 500 years for us to achieve economic equity. That's what the Institute for Policy Studies said. Y'all need to wake up. In 2085, Black people will have negative wealth in this country, having been here since 1532, not 1619. So somebody's playing a game with us because you
Yeah,
can't elevate one person. I hear you saying, Dr. West,
that's
while
right.
you can't elevate one while the rest of us die.
That's exactly right.
So
We
talk
we
to
got
me.
to have a commitment to the preciousness of Jamal and Letitia.
Hmm.
Just as you have a commitment to the preciousness of Sister Harris. I mean, Sister Harris, I would want to protect her. I pray for her in terms of she's on treacherous terrain in terms of the same kind of death threats that many of us have been living under all this time. I don't want anything bad to happen to her. But
Mhm.
I look at her words, her policies, I look at her priorities, and I don't see Letitia and Jamal there. And that's our commitment. I read the 25th chapter. Matthew says, what you do in as much as you do it to the least of these, the least of these. And, and especially with a Democratic Party that is, even as Jesse himself wanted to put that pressure on to change it, it's still a kind of plantation. And you can't confuse movement and moving up on a plantation with being on the Underground Railroad. It's not the same thing.
Phew.
And don't try to confuse people like that. You can get all the black faces in high places you want, but if you still got a rotten empire and a system of organized greed and the masses of black people not being respected and don't have access to the resources that allow them to live lives of dignity, you can have all the black faces at the top you want. But my Christian witness tells me I got to give priority to the least of these. That's a moral and spiritual question. It's not tribal. It's not a function of skin pigmentation at all. Now, as a black man, I fight against white supremacy. If there's white supremacist abuse of Sister Harris, I come out swinging. If there's white supremacist abuse of Clarence Thomas, I come out swinging because I hate white supremacy. That doesn't mean I like Clarence's policies. He is right wing as he can be. He's wrong as two left shoes. But when it comes to white supremacist abuse coming at him, I'm against that kind of abuse because it's a moral and spiritual issue. But when it comes to structural analysis, when it comes to power analysis, it's clear that either Clarence Thomas or Kamala Harris side with the powerful. And we saw that with Obama siding with Wall Street. It's just a particular policy and position that people make. And it has to be acknowledged as such, and it has to be criticized as such. When I decided to follow Jesus 50 some years ago, I was going to follow Jesus into that temple with 300 imperial troops protecting that temple. His disciples abandoned him. Peter are going to deny him. He gets into that temple and runs out the money changers, not because he hates the rich, he hates greed. And he's then arrested and crucified as a criminal. For what? For the love that he has. That's what it is to follow Jesus. And you can't follow Jesus when you're obsessed with being number one on Pontius Pilate's payroll.
What do you say to, in Chicago, we're looking at the migrants, the least of these? I've talked about this tent program for refugees, which is more than 400 corporations
Yes.
that are sponsoring these people to, they want Venezuela without Venezuelans so they can take the oil. They want Africa without Africans. I keep trying to tell people, I'm like, yo, come on, help me. I know, but I want, no, you're Dr. West, because I'm in class with you today. Because I'm trying to find out what about the migrants? Because they put them in the middle of, they put the most desperate people in the most desperate areas. And they're making Black people look like we don't support the least of these. That's not true. But every promise that has been given to Black people, they have
reneged over and over and over again. And one of the reasons why they reneged is because they view Black people as an afterthought. And one of the reasons why you get brothers and sisters coming up from Mexico and other places, because you got cartels that have set in. You've had U.S. policies that have extracted so many profits and riches that people's lives are lives of dealing with poverty and violence, and they go anywhere they can, and they come across the border, and you end up with folk going at each other's throats, both of whom are deeply, deeply economically weak, economically exploited. You get the migrants against the Black folk, because Black folk, we certainly have a right to say, hey, we deserve to be treated with dignity. And you got folk just showing up in the country and you're treating them better than you treat us. That's a legitimate question. That doesn't mean we demonize. That doesn't mean we act as if their children have less value or anything. That's a legitimate question. That's part of the rottenness of the system, because it's a system in which those who have very little have hardly any options other than to turn on each other, because if they came together and turned on the most powerful, there would be attempt to either crush them or to marginalize them, very much like third party candidates.
What do you, when we vote for you, what are we voting for?
I would hope that we're voting for a vision of the world in which organized greed and weaponized hatred does not sit at the center, and in which we could try to get at some of the roots of the fascism that's already thoroughly controlled the Republican Party and has already got hold of the Democratic Party and getting deeper and deeper. So that it's hard to make the case for voting for me if you're looking for an overnight effect or a push button impact. And that's why people come at me and say, well, Brother West, it's just not practical. I agree with your vision. I agree about the greed at the top, or what biblically I'd call the wickedness in high places. I understand that, but a vote for you still doesn't give me what I want tomorrow. They're right about that, because our struggle has always been one in which, if our decisions are based solely on push button solutions, we would just have a history of sellouts. There'd be no Harriet Tubman. There'd be no Frederick Douglass. There'd be no Ida B. Wells Barnett. There'd be no Jesse Jackson Sr. There'd be no Santita on the radio. Because it would all be down to just what my brother Cliff West called transaction, quid pro quo. I do something in order to get something back. Everything I proceed is based on a transaction. No, we are a transformation-oriented people. What we do is try to transform each other, to have impact on our vision, to unsettle our minds so we can think more critically, to broaden our hearts and souls so we can act more courageously. That's not push button solution. That's a long run kind of perspective, tied to vision, tied to witness, tied to praxis. Now, it does have an impact in a significant way, because even the sellouts don't even have a possibility of selling out if the folk who didn't sell out before didn't sacrifice to create the possibilities for the sellouts. I know that kind of sounds maybe too
No,
many words and things though, but for all the folk who get up into the establishment and too cowardly to really take a stand, they wouldn't be in the establishment if they black folk, if it wasn't for their mothers and fathers and grandmothers and grandfathers who sacrificed for them. Though they may have been financially broke as the Ten Commandments, many of them were rich in Jesus. So what does it mean to be rich in Jesus? Oh, Manuel Scott SR, he got a sermon on that, didn't he? You go home and make a list of all the things you have that money can't buy, and whatever's on that list makes you rich. Very rich, spiritually, culturally, psychically, because money can't buy the deep riches of a human being. That's what black folk have always had.
I've got about 3 or 4 minutes left here, and I want to give them to you. It seems to me that you're saying you're saying what Dr. King said, oh my goodness, just before he died, that we we need to turn away from spiritual death, which is what he saw us approaching.
Yes, yes.
And please speak to that. I mean, because to me, your candidacy is very serious, and it helps us to get to where we're supposed to be. I'm all for politics of pragmatism. I think that's great. That having been said, if you, dare I say, if you don't keep hope alive and move toward the beloved community, we'll never get there.
Exactly.
What what, what do you want us to what do you want us to know in these last 3 4 minutes that you've got?
You said it so eloquently, my dear sister. What does a man or woman gain if they gain the whole world and lose their souls? You see, any candidacy, and this is true for any life, and in some ways it's true for any art, any song, that it's got to have a certain morality and spirituality in it to touch other souls, to give them a possibility of a hope that goes beyond just the deal making and the legalized bribery and normalized corruption of the present moment. And if you can't provide a vision and a witness that goes beyond just survival of the slickest, then what are we talking about anyway? They used to say that if we win the rat race, the winner is still a rat. See, we run in a different kind of race. See, we run in the race that you hear Paul say, "Oh, now you come to the end." And I noticed the race that you ran had a certain moral and spiritual witness to it that the world didn't understand. They thought it was foolish, but I used the foolish things in the world for something else deeper. It has to do with their souls. And we've always been a soulful people. Their soul ain't nothing but the sharing of a soothing sweetness against the backdrop of our catastrophe. That's the sweetness, the kindness, the gentleness, those intangibles that keep us going, because the deals can never speak to that. Even the money can't speak to that. Even the status and the spectacle can't speak to those levels of spiritual and moral depth. That's crucial, it seems to me. And that's very much what the campaign is also about. So young folk be able to say, oh, we see what it's like not to sell out. We see what it's like to be concerned about integrity, honesty, decency, and truth telling. But he got crushed. I know. At least we have an example of it. And Harriet Tubman from the grave could say, oh, they didn't forget about me.
Mm.
Annie Lou say, oh, they didn't overlook me. They wasn't all concerned about being well adjusted to the injustice and well accommodated to the powers that be. Oh, my witness was one that still was at work, even though they had to run third party on the margins, misunderstood, attacked, rebuked, and scorned, death threats, and all kind of other symbolic threats. Yes, our tradition still goes on. That's a magnificent thing. That's a beautiful thing. I know when I talked to Sonny Rollins, and he used to always talk about his conversations with John Coltrane, the Train would always remind him when the critics would trash both of them. He said, Sonny, don't forget about the larger picture, man. See, we concerned about what Charlie Parker would say.
Mm.
We concerned about what Father Hines would say.
Mm.
They set the standard. What's Ben Webster saying about? It's not the mainstream critics. It's not corporate media. It's not the political operatives of both parties setting the standard. No, not at all. And Curtis Mayfield used to say what my grandmama would say, who was an evangelist in Chicago and Cabrini.
That's right.
You see? Because she had a love. He knew she had a love. She had a concern of his genius and his talent and so forth. That's the crucial thing. And so it is with our preachers. What would Garner Taylor say? Or what would Mahalia Jackson say when you sing the beautiful, magnificent song that I heard you sing in Las Vegas just a few weeks ago? When I listen to you, I hear Mahalia, I hear Carmen McRae, I hear Sarah Vaughan, I hear that's our, and it's not just a tribal thing. It just happens to be the best. We talk about the best. I ain't got nothing against, Dolly Parton and others. Hey, that's all right. Y'all go to lift your voice. But when Mahalia walks in, everybody sit down.
Mm. Absolutely.
That's the greatness of Black people. That's the greatness of who we are at our best. At our best.
Well, what did my father say? We have made our point, and now we will go home. But you can't go home. We got November 5th and beyond. Because I do believe that beyond November 5th, our nation is in need of reconciliation and healing. Well, truth telling.
Yes.
And a reckoning. Let me not get ahead of myself.
That's right.
And I think that you are central to all of that. And I thank God for that. And I tell you what, Paula said, we need another third hour. So this is what I'm going to do. Anytime you have time before this, for this campaign, because I got to get you on Reverend's nationally syndicated show, and I'm saying this publicly.
I'd love to do that.
Need you Sunday. We're on from 7 to 9. I'll speak with your beautiful, beautiful wife, my sister. And we're going to get you on Reverend's show. And anytime you can come back here, because I would like to have you for a couple of hours in the next week or so. Because I need you to respond to what we're seeing, because we need to be cleansed. I think we've gotten so excited about these moments that we're missing some points. I want you to know Reverend did not run to strengthen the Democratic Party. He ran to strengthen democracy and to save the republic. We had young Black Republicans for Jesse Jackson. Armstrong Williams headed that up. Those campaigns were pure like yours. And this is about something bigger. than a party. This is about something bigger than a history that people tell you that you're making. We've got a world to remake. And this man of God is working as hard as he can with his beautiful, virtuous wife at his side to make that happen. And just on behalf of everybody, I want to thank you.
Oh, that's beautiful.
I want to
No,
thank you.
I received that, and it just touches me and it empowers me. And with you and your precious family and listeners, we all try to do the best that we can in light of the callings and gifts that we have and we cultivate. We all want. I want to, of course, always lift up my dear brother Dwight McKee. We praying for him. We pulling,
Okay.
brother. I saw him twice in Chicago. He's bouncing back in a beautiful way,
Yes.
and we want to end with that kind of acknowledgement of those precious ones in our life. You know what I mean? So
Absolutely.
I salute you, my dear sister, and we're gonna do something with Brother Jesse's show. And of course, anytime you call, I come running. Now you know that.
Well, let me tell you, I would say goodbye to everybody here. I love you. Dr. Cornell West, Santita Jackson, love you all, everybody. God bless.